Hello everybody, welcome to the Little Woman podcast. I want to give a shout out to Kimberly for this very insightful comment about Marmy's character. We often discuss how Laurie and Joe shippers injure their favorite characters' arcs as well as Amy's too, but Marmy also, more subtly, suffers from this blasphemy as well. An important scene between Book Joe and Marmy is omitted, and Marmy's role as a wise confidant gets upended by this omission. It is Marmy who agrees with Joe's own assertment of Joe's and Laurie's relationship and encourages her trip to New York. Mrs. Kirk is even a friend of Marmy's, without whom Joe wouldn't have otherwise found such easy employment that far away from home. Marmy loses important credibility in the film versions where Laurie is concerned. Joe would never be advised to act against her judgment and understanding of her own nature. Marmy is as much of a mother figure to Laurie as Joe is, and is as privy to his follies as she is to her own daughter's character flaws. She does not only speak of her awareness of their incompatibility, but actively assists Joe in her plan to discourage Laurie's affections. I have often wondered why Jo never said anything about her mother as her champion when Laurie says that their families expect their union. But Jo stands on her own 2 feet, taking responsibility for her own feelings and insight, and that makes her even more of an endearing and capable person in the face of a personal choice despite heartache. End quote. Thank you, Kimberly. That was very well written. When Laurie proposes, he says to Jo that everyone in their families is expecting that. That is not quite true, because I don't think Jo's parents really expect Jo to marry Laurie. In this episode, my guest Sinem and I will be reading chapter Surprises from Little Woman and analyze it. This chapter takes place after Beth has passed away. Laurie and Amy are married, and Jo is experiencing an emotional crisis due to the loss of Beth, but she also envies her sisters' marriages when she sees them happy and flourishing. A lot of this comes from Louisa May Alcott's personal life. She has multiple diary markings where she writes about similar experiences. In Little Woman, when Jo is feeling all these deep emotions, she misses Fredrik a great deal. Sinem and I will be also discussing about Jo March and Not Like the Other Girls trope. A lot of my listeners have asked me to make more episodes about this topic, how Jo is like a pick-me-up girl, and especially in part 1 of Little Woman, Not Like the Other Girls girl, who kind of puts other women down. She eventually becomes more of a feminist character, and that is thanks to Fredrik and Marmy and other people in Jo's life. And it also has a lot to do with her personal growth to become more of an intersectional feminist. Before entering the podcast, I wanted to let you all know that a Little Woman podcast now has merchandise available at society6.com/littlewomanpodcast. There you will find stickers, posters, mugs, and t-shirts to fulfill all your Little Woman needs. And season 1 of the Little Woman podcast has also appeared as an audiobook. You can find the link in the description, and you can also follow me on Instagram at Podcasting Little Woman. This is Small Umbrella in the Rain, the Little Woman podcast, Jo March and Not Like the Other Girls, Trope. This is why Fredrik's character is so important, because he, and I think Marmy and also Meg and then Amy, they also have this good influence on Jo, because they show that, well, it's not weakness to feel empathy, that it's actually a strength. I mean, there are some scenes in the book where Jo is like, she doesn't want to show people that she cries or that she feels sadness, because she thinks that it makes her look weak in the eyes of others, and that is toxic masculinity.
Some of my characteristics, like seeing crying as a weakness, I have to admit that was part of how I saw myself. Like, I would never allow myself to cry in front of others. I kind of destroyed myself a little bit with that. Like, it was not good. I have to say I recovered from it now, but I think it is so important that she lives out all her feelings and not just the ones that are deemed right because they are more masculine.
I think that's a big problem in our culture, that women who are this kind of Joe type are idealized for not being quote-unquote weak. There's nothing weak about being able to show emotion and feel sympathy to others.
That's true. How people accept the fact and kind of support the fact that Joe bullies kind of Amy for being more feminine.
Yes.
And that she's like, blah, blah. And they're like, well, yes, Amy deserves it. Amy is feminine. And I think what is also wrong is that they think that Amy dislikes Joe, but that's not the case. Because I think in calls, it is Amy is like, if only you would try to be a bit more open and not so cold towards everyone, they would like you more because there's so much more to you than there is to me. And I think that's a great compliment.
I think from all the sisters, Jo was actually the most insecure about herself. Because in chapter Calls, there's the moment when one of the ladies gives her compliments about her novel, and Jo is like, nah, it was nothing, and she kind of makes mockery of her story and the lady who is giving her compliments. And it's kind of sad.
In that chapter where Amy's numbers, please don't be one or something like that, and it's funny because to me, Amy, like, seeing this like she is not a reformer, like she shows that side to her, to the society and all that stuff, and does she get what she wants? Does she get to her goals? And Jo gets her goals entirely differently, but she learns to respect the way of her sister, of all of her sisters, and then she kind of embraces her being more feminine and more caring, because that is actually also part of it. Jo only covers it with toxic masculinity because she's afraid people will laugh or at her or judge her for that. And it is also very embracing that she does like being feminine because it is important, and it's also feminist. It's very important, and it showcases that people can improve.
In Jo's boys, Jo is more of a feminist. But I think also in Little Man there are some moments when she kind of belittles her female students and prefers the male students. This is a complicated matter because we know that Louisa May Alcott really loved boys, but then she also grew, apparently, same way as Jo, to appreciate women a lot more.
I think also, like, what is very important is that mostly people view feminists as those who only want to educate women, but I also think it's very nice that Louisa May Alcott did love boys, because I think on making the world more open-minded and also to be more a feminist society, we also need to educate the boys so that they also can respect women. And I also think that it's very good that Jo educates her boys in a very good manner.
It's also because she has this bad experience with Laurie. She wants that her boys, the boys that she's teaching, are going to be gentlemen and treat women with more respect. I remember you mentioned the scene in Jo's Boys when she lectures these young men that when they are flirting with girls that they need to be more respectful. And that's directly the result of her own experience with Laurie.
It also shows that Jo is very courageous because, and how much she has actually improved, because I don't think that I don't think that Jo March in book 1 would, or part 1, would to these students and instead treat this person with more respect. I think she would have said, well, this woman should not have been on such airs and all that stuff. I also said one time that for me Jo March isn't a feminist. She is more like a person like this, not like other girls, which normally people hate, but in Joe they kind of love it, which is weird. And Joe Bear is a feminist, but and Friedrich has a very big influence on her growth.
I think that's really like a trap within feminism, because I know a lot of people who I consider to be feminist, but they don't like to call themselves as feminist because feminism has such a bad reputation, because it's, like you said, there are times when a lot of feminists behave that is actually very misogynistic, same way as Joe often treats Amy, because feminism, it really should be about creating equality to everyone, not just women to be better than men, but often it unfortunately turns out to be women being bitched to other women.
That's very true. And I also have to say, what also bothers me is that many people don't really like Amy and Meg and Beth because they are much more feminine. Like, okay, Beth, and Meg, they are like at times insufferable, but I think most of them hate. I think the most hated characters in the fandom are Friedrich and Amy. But it's kind of weird because Amy they dislike because she stole the trip, etc. She stole Rory, and as they call it, and she destroyed Joe's book. Which to that, okay, that wasn't a nice thing to do at all. But I don't think Louisa May Alcott justifies it. I don't think she paints it as a good thing either. And with Friedrich, it's funny because they say he mansplained her, but then when Joe mocks Amy and all that stuff, these people are like, well, yes, Amy deserved it, she is selfish and all that stuff. And I'm just like, wait a minute, did you just say that for a woman to be kind of bitchy against another woman is a good thing, but if a man states his opinion, it's viewed as mansplaining? That's very weird.
It is, and nobody speaks about that because in Little Woman, when Amy burns Joe's book, Joe has been bullying her for months in a row, and it's clearly explained in the book how angry Amy feels about it. It has nothing to do with Laurie taking Joe to theater. It has everything to do with Joe being a bully, but people don't speak about it. They justify it because Amy is such a feminine girl, and they want to tease the feminine girl.
There's a passage where I think it states that she was afraid that she wouldn't be loved anymore by anyone because of this act. So I always thought that it was like she loved herself very much because she was afraid that nobody would love her. And that was like her way to make sure, well, I do still love myself, so it will be fine.
Louisa May Alcott and May Alcott, they had a very complicated relationship, especially when they were children, because Louisa envied May in a lot of ways because she was younger, and I thought it was very weird when she says that, oh, May gets everything so easily, which was not the case always. I don't think people speak enough about Joe's jealousy to Amy or Louisa's jealousy to May, because I don't think her being a bully is really enough spoken in Little Woman community.
But the weird thing for me is, like, I can understand jealousy in general. Like, I also had that at one time where I was like, my sister is more loved by my mother, but of course, which is very stupid. But it's weird that people who understand Joe's jealousy still are, most of them are like, well, Amy is a bad person, whereas the point of Joe's jealousy and her growth is actually to respect her little sister more. With thus, she also respects herself more, because I think jealousy is also a very big part of insecurity. Her whole arc is around her being more confident with who she truly is.
And I think one of the problems is that people treat it like they are arguing over Laurie, which never happens in the book. And it feels really uncanny because, unfortunately, a lot of the movies make it seem that way. Like the 2019 film, you don't have Laurie's growth or him harassing Joe and then Joe wanting Laurie back with that letter. Yes, you can see that as Amy and Joe arguing over Laurie. In 1949 film, in the end of the movie, when Laurie introduces Amy to Joe, the scene ends Laurie staring at Joe like he is still in love with her 1994 film. It doesn't explain the reason why Joe doesn't get to go to Europe. And Joe is just like, oh, I get to go to Europe now. And Amy's like, no, Aunt Marge decided to take me. And that happens right after Joe has rejected Laurie, and that proposal is very much romanticized.
I also think that many people who read the chapter calls, they are like, well, Joe deserves the trip, but I think it's very important to know, because for them it's like she has spoken in a feminist way to her aunts, and for me that isn't true, because first of all, she is belittling French, the language of France, because, I mean, if she goes to Europe, then she of course is also going to France, so why would you just ruin your own chances of going on a trip if you don't have, like, the language? What people perceive as feminist is that Joe is like, well, female labor, female work, etc. But the thing is, Joe does not see them as, like, for her, they are, she's like, is that really all? Is that so important? I mean, it's just what women do. It's not like she wishes women to have more work or something. She's like, well, it's women's job anyway.
That kind of reminds me of that moment that you spoke about in chapter 3 when she says that women are just nurses and...
She said something like that, why don't you invite girls? Girls are quiet and like to play nurses.
Yes, and that's kind of same what she does in the chapter calls. Like, she belittles women's work. She belittles what is expected from women at the time. I think it's kind of the same when she sort of criticizes all these high-class social events that Meg is interested from. But I always thought that maybe it's because she herself would like to know what that is like. Because people kind of see Joe as not very pretty or not very attractive. And maybe sometimes a bit scary.
I also think it's important that she gets to fall in love with somebody like Friedrich, because Joe, while she might seem like an extrovert, for me she's more like an introvert, because like she has the community of her mother, of her family and of Laurie, and the only one she grows a companionship with is actually Friedrich. And extroverts have many friends, and Joe doesn't feel comfortable with going into crowds and talking to many people. So I think it's very important, because Friedrich embraces who she is completely, and he also lets her discover herself, but he doesn't push her to anything.
We had this discussion in Tumblr some time ago that why people think that Joe is very adventurous, because when she is in New York, she doesn't really go and seek these fun events that there might be. She wants to hang out with Fredrik all the time.
Because she criticized the sensational stories, which she called trash, which is what, I mean, she even herself calls them kind of trash all the time.
Yes.
When she stops writing them, because she doesn't want to sell her own morals, and then she can't find, the publishers don't want to publish her stories anymore, because they know what the public demands. And then, because she can't write, she hangs out with Friedrich all the time. And I also love that he teaches her German. I think that is also something that very much connected these two even more.
It's so funny, because when Joe is in New York and people are like, why would she be attracted to that old German? He's 39, so he's not old, at least in today's standards. But when Joe is in New York, she literally moves the couch, rearranges her seat so she can look at him all day long. I remember somebody once commented on some of my posts that, well, Amy was horrible. She only cared about the money and she didn't care at all about her family. And I literally had to add a snapshot from the book, from the scene where Amy says that Joe won't marry well, Meg didn't, Beth won't, so I am the only choice. I need to marry well so I can provide for our family.
It is actually also very sad, because the fact that like when people read this book, they are like, Joe and Laurie should have been together, and like Amy is a gold digger, and I'm just like, well, technically speaking, if she had stayed with Fred Vaughn, she would have been a gold digger. She actually was only together with him because he had so much money. It's also important to note that you were also, I think on Quora, somebody you stated that Laurie harasses Joe many times, that he respects Amy very much, like he is all present in the book, that he very much respects her. I think in a late chapter, maybe Lawrence, he is also kind of disappointed that she is like, yeah, I have to stop painting. He's disappointed, but with Joe, he is like, you don't need to write, I'm rich and all that stuff. But when Amy says, I don't want to paint anymore, he's disappointed.
It also shows that how bad this couple dynamics between Joe and Laurie was, because they never seemed to have been equals, only when they were in this brother dynamics when they were younger. But even then there were these moments when Joe was like petting him and calling him her boy. So there's also always this either paternal or maternal relationship between them, but then he treats Amy as his equal.
I think his respect for her especially shows in chapter 19, like the Amy's will chapter, when Amy is in the house, stays in the house of Aunt Marge, because I think Amy states her will and wants him to scribble his name on the paper. I think with Joe on Ray, he would have laughed at that and say, my, what a stupid thing. But to Amy in that chapter, he listens to how she feels and he tries to cheer her up.
With Joe and Laurie, it was also because they fed each other with these not so healthy ideas that also made this relationship not working.
Yes, that is sad. It is when people are claiming that Joe and Laurie should have been together, and the fact that Laurie thought he loved Joe in that way. I once read a fan fiction of Laurie and Amy, like a comment on that. I forgot the name of the fan fiction, but a comment on that said that the way Fred Vaughn in the novel perceived Amy was kind of the same Laurie did with Joe, because it wasn't, first of all, an idealized version of who these women were, and it wasn't the truth of how they were, because Joe, like, she was very maternal to me, that's true, but she would have never loved Laurie, and I don't think she would have petted him the way he wanted her to after a while, because I'm sure she would have started getting sick of his attention-seeking and tantrum throwing. Fred perceives Amy as this well-mannered lady and all of that, which she, of course, she is, but she also has a character besides being only kind of like a doll.
I read once that John was from England, and I started to think that maybe he came from England with his family, or maybe his family was from England and he was born in America. I don't know. I need to check that.
It really would have been interesting to say for me, when I read like the comments of the human community, I think the most underrated couple is John and Meg, the main sister trio couple, which is kind of sad because I wouldn't say they're my least favorite, but I have to say that I love all of the three couples equally because they are so different. And so in my opinion, I can't really rank them. But I have to say, I think it's very sweet how they are portrayed in the novel. And the funny thing is that, like, in his kind of proposal of John's, he is like, could you love me, Margaret? And Friedrich's proposal, he's also like, could you make a place in your heart for dear old Friedrich? Could you love me? And it's not like you have to love me, or it's also not like, because I love you, you have to marry me. It's like, could you do? And even though John may seem a bit like he's kind of forcing her, I don't think he actually is. He's just really so desperate because he loves Meg so much.
I don't think he was forceful at all. I think it was because he knew that there was this expectation that Meg should marry a rich man, so he wanted to just to tell her how he felt about her.
If I don't ask her whether she could, then maybe I'm going to lose her. Maybe I'm going to lose the life I dreamed about her. Because I think Friedrich as well as John, I think they kind of planned their lives together with the women they love. Laurie is a much more complicated one, I'd say, because I don't know whether he imagined a future with Amy, but it is very clear that those two communicate without talking.
I think he didn't really imagine a future with Amy, but I think it's really part of his growth process. Because in the chapter when he is in Vienna and he conjures the dream woman and it begins to look like Amy. First it was supposed to be Joe, but Joe never fit into his mind when the dream woman appeared. But I think it really shows his growth process, because in that chapter he actually goes to church when he realized that, oh, I'm not going to be a humbug any longer. So he goes to church, and I realized that, well, I think this is actually some kind of discussion that he's going through within himself, that who he really should be with. And then he goes to see Amy, and never in any adaptations to Vienna and the Dream Woman. It kind of bugs me, because I love that, because it shows such a great growth from his part. When I did the episode about that chapter, I didn't mention the church because I sadly forgot it, but now I will mention it, because I think that's such a big thing that he goes to work for his grandfather. He doesn't stop making music, he just stops to think that he's the best musician in the world. It's really such a huge thing for him, because he starts to think that Joe and Amy are not these dream people, dream princesses that he's just going to save. Because I felt that throughout the novel, until to that point, he had these very idealized dreams about just some random woman that he is going to save with his money, which is so unrealistic when you think about Joe and Amy, because neither one of them wants to be saved like that by him.
What I also loved in the other Louisa May Alcott's novel is that the characters with the Henry David Thoreau archetype, when they fall in love with the protagonist, the funny thing is they are already very much mature. From the beginning, the Laurie or Ladislav kind of archetypes, while they do have some maybe kind of streaks of maturity, they have to grow up themselves. And in experience, Christie criticizes even in, I think, chapter 4 it was, she criticizes that in Jane Eyre, or Jane Eyre, I don't know how to pronounce it, that Jane is the one who transforms and changes Rochester, because Louisa Alcott, I think, had to believe that men should change themselves and not let women do the job, because that, first of all, that is again toxic, and second of all, everybody is responsible for themselves. So I think it is very important that the Henry David Thoreau kind of archetypes already have this maturity, but they can still learn that. Like, for example, Friedrich improved his English, I think also because he had a life with Joe.
That is so true. I will invite you back to this podcast at some point to talk about Work, because that's a really good novel. And if somebody doesn't know, Work is the last book that Louisa May Alcott wrote. Yes.
It's also based on her experiences as a seamstress, as an actress, companion, like kind of all the jobs she did, except for there is not a chapter about her being an author. But it is also a very good novel, and for anybody who has read it and wants to read a novel of Louisa May Alcott that isn't yet women, you really should read it. But beware, there are some parts that are heavy, as in how they make you feel. And trigger warning is if anybody doesn't like the mention of suicide or something, then maybe you shouldn't read that book, because there is some part where Christie feels like it.
And I think that actually is based on Louisa May Alcott's own experiences because of her illness and then Henry passing away.
Yeah. I also have to say that for me, what is also very interesting is that Christy has the same free-spirited and energetic character that Joe has, but they are still not the same character. Like, you can see that Louisa May Alcott is a very good writer, because I think many writers would have just had these characters be completely like the same, but it isn't the problem. The case with Joe and with Christy, and I love that.
Yeah, I found Christy more mature than Joe and more pragmatic, and she's incredibly realistic. I think Joe is sometimes head in the clouds, but Christy tends to be more realistic and way more grounded.
Swedish also helps Joe very much with that.
Yes. If you are like Sinem and I, and you're kind of obsessed with Louisa May Alcott and Henry David Thoreau, then is a very good book to read.
Yes, that is true. When David unites with Christy, and then you also have Letty, his sister. I just love that passage when he's going around the house singing songs and all that stuff. That is so cute. I always smile at that. Say there's also for me kind of a parallel between the relationship of Christy and Letty. Christy, because at first they are both Letty and David are, I wouldn't say prideful, but they try to be a bit distant. And when they grow to know Christy more, they both open up to her very fast, and they show her true nature. What I also think very cute is that in one passage where Kitty, that person, is there, and David talks to his mother and says, "Mother, I cannot ask for any woman's stuff until I am worthy of it." Like, he still hasn't forgiven himself, and he still doesn't want to force himself upon Christy because he doesn't think he's worthy of her.
That's such a Joe and Frederick thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Little Woman chapter 43, Surprises. Joe was all alone in the twilight, lying on the old sofa, looking at the fire and thinking. It was her favorite way of spending the hour of dusk. No one disturbed her, and she used to lie there on Bet's little red pillow, planning stories, dreaming dreams, or thinking tender thoughts of the sister who never seemed far away. Her face looked tired, grave, and rather sad, for tomorrow was her birthday, and she was thinking how fast the years went by, how old she was getting, and how little she seemed to have accomplished. Almost 25, and nothing to show for it. Joe was mistaken in that there was a good deal to show, and by she saw, and was grateful for it. So Joe is 25 at this point. Beth has just passed away. She has returned from New York, and Laurie has been in Europe with Amy.
An old maid, that's what I'm to be. A literary spinster, with a pen for a spouse, a family of stories for children, in 20 years, hence a morsel of fame. Perhaps, when like poor Johnson, I'm old and I can't enjoy it, solitary and can't share it, independent and don't need it. Well, I needn't be a sour sage nor a selfish sinner, and I dare say old maids are very comfortable when they get used to it. But in their Joe's side, as if the prospect was not inviting. I think that it's also very important because it showcases that she doesn't feel comfortable with feeling alone any longer.
Yes, I was doing some math yesterday. This was written 1 year after Louisa May Alcott had had her encounter with Ladislas, and 5 years after Henry had passed away. And I think she was 33 or 34 when she wrote this. And Joy is obviously here 25, so she's a lot younger. But I think this is actually Louisa May Alcott writing about herself, this entire chapter. I just wanted to pay attention to these things that she says. I'm old and can't enjoy it. Solitary and can't share it. Independent and don't need it. And this is so funny to me because people are like, oh, Joe wanted to be solitary, Joe wanted to be independent, and Joe wanted to be old and enjoy it. But then here Joe says that she doesn't want any of these things.
No, she really kind of suffers very much from the fact that she is lonely and that Friedrich isn't by her side. And it's also very sad.
Yes, I was reading this yesterday and I was thinking this is a really sad chapter. This is more sad than I remembered. But that's because now I know all these stories behind it. But yes, everyone, Joe does want to be in a relationship.
Yeah, he needs it. It seldom is at first, and 30 seems the end of all things to 25. But it's not as bad as it looks. If one can get on quite happily if one has something in oneself to fall back upon. At 25, girls begin to talk about being old maids, but secretly resolve that they never will. At 30, they say nothing about it, but quietly accept the fact. And if sensible, console themselves by remembering that they have 20 more useful, happy years in which they might make a learning to grow old gracefully. Don't laugh at the spinsters, dear girls, for often very tender, tragical romances are hidden away in the hearts that beat so quietly under the sober gowns, and many silent sacrifices of youth, health, ambition, love itself make the faded faces beautiful in God's sight.
This part of tragical romances always made me wonder if she did have an affair with Henry David Thoreau, but we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then she speaks about these things that she has sacrificed. So to me, this is no longer about Joe. This is Louisa May Alcott's self-monologue.
Even the sad, sour sisters should be kindly dealt with, because they have missed the sweetest part of life, if for no other reason. And looking at them with compassion, not contempt, girls in a room should remember that they too may miss the blossom time, that rosy cheeks don't last forever, that silver threads will come in the bonny brown hair, and that by and by kindness and respect will be as sweet as love and admiration now. Gentlemen, which means boys, be courteous to the old maids, no matter how poor and plain and prim. For the old chivalry worth having is that which is the readiest to pay deference to the old, protect the feeble, and serve womankind, regardless of rank, age, or color. Just recollect the good aunts who have not only lectured and fussed, but nursed and petted, too often without thanks, the scrapes that they have helped you out of, the tips they have given you from their small store, the stitches the patient old fingers have set for you, the steps the willing old feet have taken, and gratefully pay the dear old ladies the little attentions that women love to receive as long as they love. That is very important, I think, because it is kind of like Louisa May Alcott says she kind of critiques the society for that is unfair towards spinsters or to people who haven't married or something, because they are people as well and they do deserve respect, not only from men but also from women, because I have to be honest, I think mostly women who are married are more likely to be against people who haven't married.
Yes, and in the 19th century, if you were a spinster, it was a big stigma on you. And also, I think people kind of misread this nowadays, because when this book was written, most marriages were made because of money. And Louisa May Alcott, she saw so many marriages that were made because of money and that were very unhappy. Like, for example, Emerson and his second wife, they were not very happy. In this book, in Little Women, Louisa May Alcott obviously encourages people to marry for love. And if they can't find someone to marry, they need to try to make it work somehow. But they don't want their pity. One of the reasons why, obviously, she didn't marry was because she was in love with Henry, and Henry died. And you cannot marry Laddie because he was so young and immature. But I think there had been options for her to marry someone rich if she wanted to, or someone else if she wanted to. But I think Louisa May Alcott wanted to marry for love and not for money.
Yeah, because she did not let herself get oppressed by the way society worked. That is also very important.
Obviously, she was not very happy to be alone, because when I read her journals, and you have also read her journals, she was incredibly lonely. And I think that whole part of her wanting to reunite with her lover in the next life, because I'm not very religious person, I think Yeah, I think it was more of maybe something that she believed that was actually going to happen to her. And it brought her comfort, because I think here she says that many silent sacrifices of youth, health, ambition, love itself. She has had this very unhappy life. To us in modern times, it might seem quite exciting that she was this writer in this era that we might consider exciting. But obviously, she was very ill. She did struggle with her family and had this, we don't know what kind of relationship she had with this man, but tragical romances apparently. I think there was a lot more in Louisa May Alcott than this pop culture idea of her that we are being represented by people like Greta Gerwig.
Yeah, I agree. What's also very important is that if you also look at Jo as a character, she wanted to be around her sisters kind of like all the time. She didn't want Meg to marry because then the family would have been diminished by one. And I think that is also very important because she didn't want to be alone even then.
And I know that when Anna Alcott married John Pratt, Louisa had lost her sister Lizzie just a month before that. Anna was going to get married and May was planning to move abroad, and Lizzie had died. So she must have felt very alone that all her sisters were leaving her. And then Henry had died a couple of years earlier, so she had lost her best friend. But yeah, it's sad. This is a very sad chapter, at least this beginning.
It, of course, hope thankfully gets more hopeful. I don't know what will happen of me, but I think when I'll be older, I probably am going to relate to Jo even more, because to be honest, even now at my age, which isn't very much, but I still don't want to be alone. So I can see how Jo must feel, especially because somebody from a family she loves very much has passed away.
I agree. I think especially now that my sister became ill last year, it had really made me think a lot more about my life and what kind of life I want to live. These kind of events, they really make you think things a lot deeper. People don't know it if they don't experience it.
Death is everywhere, and you should try to live your life to the fullest, because you don't know what is ever going to happen to you.
I have this quote from Louisa May Alcott that she wrote to her journal when May had married. Happy letters from May, who is enjoying life as one can but once. And then with a sudden vision of her own lonely lot, she exclaims, how different our lives are just now. I so lonely and sick, and she so happy and blessed. She always had the cream of things and deserved it. My time is yet to come somewhere else when I am ready for it. So here we get, once again, the wish fulfillment. But I was thinking about this. Even May died to childbirth. I think Louisa still envied her sister, because her sister got married and had a child for a moment.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think she even says here, these spinsters that she speak about, they have missed the sweetest part of life. Sorry, everyone, for making this very sad for you.
And if you don't find somebody you love like this, remember to always love and respect yourself, because that is going to make you happy.
Thank you so much for listening. Sinem and I continue our discussion on the next episode. Take care and make good choices. Bye.